So I went to see Guardians of the Galaxy 2 this weekend. Are you familiar with it? Some hands? Good. I know some of you saw it because we've talked about it. Now, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is a movie based on a comic book in the sort of science fiction, superhero, comedy mashup genre that is popular these days. And it's a franchise. That's what the 2 means. And as such, as a franchise, it strives to provide the audience with 90 minutes of relatively unchallenging entertainment. And it achieved this goal admirably if it delivered those 90 minutes in its format, which was 138. And it did this less because of the plot, in which our heroes saved the galaxy, as promised in the title, or the acting, which was solid but heavily CGI, but instead because of the exceptional environment these guardians live and move in. The film is set in a universe that is so obviously not our own, but at the same time it's enough like it that we can see ourselves in it. It has its own internal logic, to the point that even though one of the stars is in fact a gun-toting talking raccoon and another is a walking baby tree, it doesn't break the suspension of disbelief. Guardians of the Galaxy 2, as with any good work of art, high or low, regardless of the medium being used, invites us to participate in it and finds us a place of habitation. Now, this movie will probably not win a lot of awards, but it will be, and is, hugely popular. Because sometimes, after a hard week, we just want to be somewhere else for a while. The world slaps us around on a mundane level. In this mundane version of our planet Earth, it kicks us around when we experience all kinds of disappointments, of griefs and setbacks. And then, on a communal level, we constantly face those challenges and conflicts that come with trying to build a just society, or just to live with people sometimes. So with all the stresses and pressures put on us during our normal days, we get tired. We want something better. And we dream. Now, sometimes we dream with intention, seeking out a better model for our future, and sometimes we just dream to maintain our sanity. But even as we escape into our dreams of better places, what we invent and what we see in our grander vision tells us a lot about ourselves, about what we find important right here, about what we do and do not want to become as individuals and as a society. As Tolkien said in our reading today, these fantastical landscapes, in addition to all the magic and legendary creatures, these landscapes hold the seas, the sun, the moon, the sky, and the earth, and all that is in it. And he says, it holds us, ourselves, mortals, when we are enchanted. These landscapes, these fantasy landscapes, contain us because we have made them real in our heads and in our hearts. Now, the dream worlds that endure, the ones that last for generations, are the ones that we have put the most of ourselves into, the ones which teach us in clear and compelling ways while leaving room for new adventures. In Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan doesn't make any effort to pretend that the world he is imagining is in any way realistic. His characters have symbolic names, like Christian and hopeful. And they travel through places like the valley of the shadow of death and the enchanted ground. The point is that by making these fantasy worlds, ones where perhaps, as in Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, all the women are strong and all the men are good looking and all the children are above average, by making these fantasy worlds, we teach ourselves about how we should live in our actual world. And we even practice it. We practice it as we experience whatever universe art provides, considering how we would act in a given situation, rooting for the redemption of the sympathetic bad guys, for the ultimate defeat of the unsympathetic ones, and the ultimate victory of goodness, whatever that means. This participation in imagined worlds can be taken even farther in the world of gaming. In computer role-playing games like Skyrim. How many of you have played Skyrim? All right. World of Warcraft. Those sorts of games. We have the opportunity to explore someone else's imagined landscape to a level of detail that a film or book cannot aspire to. And then in traditional pencil and paper role-playing that we talked about this morning a little bit, we take it a step further. We invent and adopt a character for ourselves, with hopes and dreams and aspirations, along with mad adventuring skills most of the time, and set them loose with a map to discover a landscape and society that is being grown and developed in real time by the players themselves. Now, when I was a kid, and this is true, some of you may remember this, when I was a kid, these games were actually considered evil or demonic in some quarters. They were guaranteed, parents were told that they were guaranteed to drive their children insane. Now, we play them in church. And we see them as yet another great way to learn about good and evil, about politics and religion, about identity and decision-making. As Gary Gygax said years ago, this game lets all your fantasies come true. This is a world where monsters, dragons, good and evil high priests, fierce demons, and even the gods themselves may enter your character's life. Now, perhaps with that last line, you have no trouble imagining what fantasy world building and movie going and game playing have to do with the religious life. In the game, you invent gods, both good ones and evil ones, and false ones. Challenging and being challenged by those gods helps us to separate what is sacred in our lives from mere idol worship. It helps us to see the people that we aspire to become. But it's religious in another way, too. These imagined worlds address the basic questions of our existence, birth, death, and our place in the role in creation. Which is to say, just as with many human creative endeavors, they work in the same area of life as the prophets and the spiritual teachers. When I entered college carrying my D&D books, my Lord of the Rings, and the collected works of C.S. Lewis, I quickly found myself sitting in an introductory Bible class where I learned that we humans have been dreaming up ideal fantasy worlds way before John Bunyan and the Puritans. In fact, we have been doing this for as long as we humans have been telling each other stories. Every civilization, from before ancient Egypt until today, has built a real, concrete society upon the story of an idealized and imagined world. Sometimes it's a better place to strive for, sometimes it's a worse place to avoid. Sometimes it's both. For Jesus, this place to strive for was the commonwealth of heaven, which he attempted to describe frequently in the Gospels, beginning essentially with what we heard today. The commonwealth of heaven is like a mustard seed, he says, which, when sown on the ground, is the smallest of all the seeds on earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes the greatest of all shrubs. I love this, the greatest of all shrubs, by the way. And puts forth large branches. Now, there are some traditions that say this commonwealth of heaven is a real place out on some other plane. And it doesn't get more Dungeons and Dragons than that. A place we can visit after our death. But the way Jesus talks about it, at least to me, it seems more likely that it is an aspirational place. His contribution to all the other places that his fellow humans build and describe for each other. And one that he calls us, and maybe this is where it's different, it's one that he calls us to build right here in the imperfect realm that we inhabit, sowing it into the ground so that it might grow up and put forth branches. A society more peaceful and more just, more loving and inclusive than the one that we find ourselves in. And you know, I think we can build it. We can do it by dreaming our dreams of a more sacred way, by holding them up in our heads and our hearts and living like they are real, so that someday they might be. Someday they might be. So let's take a moment in silence now to think about the worlds that we have built and how they have compelled us, for better or for worse, to be the people we are now and the ones we are becoming. May the spirit of prayer and meditation be on this house.